Okay.
Let's drug it. What was the fix?
A cup.
I would ask RJ.
Just something to keep some pressure.
Yeah,
Just enough pressure to keep it
I
straight.
told you, it's bent.
Okay. All right, testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, great. So I'm Jeff Beck. I'm basically like a guy from New Hampshire who's a lizard online, and I'm real big into music and rhythm games. So today at Retroworld Expo, this Friday evening, I'm going to be presenting the real history of rhythm games from about 1997 until 2010 with some kind of diversions here and there. So for the most part, like I said, it's mostly going to be 1997 to 2010, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about the time before that, for like the early 70s as well as some periods in the 90s, directly before like the big boom after like the late 90s. So let's define some terms. So a lot of people use music game and rhythm game really interchangeably. I'd say a music game is more like a game where you do stuff to the music, but you're not really judged so strictly on it, and you're not really given a grade at the end, and you're more or less just having fun. But like a rhythm action game is a game in which you're graded continuously throughout the song that's playing, and then you receive a grade at the end. It's much more about performance and skill and execution. So we're going to use these different terms throughout the thing, and I'll kind of delineate which is a music game and which is like a rhythm action game. Ignore that. So the main two everyone knows, obviously, are Guitar Hero and Dance Dance Revolution. Like everybody's probably played one of these, like a party, or maybe you might have had one of the soft mats at some point in your life, but otherwise, like, a lot of people probably don't know, like, a lot about this other stuff, like, either before, like, the big boom in the 2000s, or even, like, what it is today. So my goal with this presentation is to more or less fill in those gaps for people and sort of illustrate a lot of the craziness and talk about the whole universe of music games as much as I could talk about in 45 minutes. And also a lot of Konami's litigation against any kind of music or rhythm game that existed from their inception to today. They're big patent trolls, and we're going to talk all about this. So even before the major like rhythm games that started appearing in the late 90s, you had a lot of prehistoric kind of music games. You had like Simon Says, obviously, you go click the buttons and follow the tones and try to memorize as much as you can. Then you also had games like Otoki, which in a lot of ways was like the first proper music game. I'm gonna go play a video here. I might play an ad first, so I'm gonna go skip that. Pay for YouTube Premium, why can't it work through the embed? Skip. Really?
Yeah.
Why isn't it skipping? That's curious. Please play. Or it plays another ad, thank you.
4K downloader for the win.
Well, I'm using the embeds within PowerPoint. I'm not sure exactly why it doesn't want to work. Sorry, just give me a second to kind of figure out a way to skip this. Normally it just kind of works, so it's kind of curious. So I'm going to show the clip in a second, but essentially Otoki is like a sort of shmup game in which all of the actions in the game, regardless of like your motions and also the shot types that you're taking, all make music that kind of quantize to the beat of the backing tracks, and the different sort of shots you use also go and like kind of sync up and harmonize with the rest of the track. So I don't know why it didn't let me skip the ad, so very strange. I mean, I can find the video clip quick. Sorry, I had to go all the way over to YouTube. All right, I'm just going to move on for now. So I kind of described what it is already. So within the early mid to 1990s, you had this guy, Masaya Matsuura, which in a lot of ways would be considered like the father of what we consider music games. So before he made the games that he's most famous for, he was in this J-pop band called Size. He was the main producer and composer, along with a woman named Chaka, who was the main vocalist. They were really, really popular in the late 80s to the mid 1990s, and they had 4 very successful albums, and they also did a lot of anime music and sort of insert songs for things as well. But Masaya Matsuura ended up disbanding the project in like the mid 1990s, and he ended up making a lot of multimedia software for the Macintosh, which was a huge bed of creativity for a lot of what are called multimedia artists in the early to late 1990s. So one of the major projects he made during that period was a game called The Seven Colors, Legend of Size City. It wasn't really a music game, it was more like an adventure game that used kind of inspiration from the band and their music. But at the same time, he met another creator in this sort of sphere who was working in Japan at the time, Rodney Greenblatt. an illustrator from New York who did a lot of work in Japan through a company called Interlink. So he made a lot of like mostly children's sort of toys and edutainment software, like Rodney's Wonder Window and Dazzleoids and Rodney's Fun Screen. A lot of stuff was just meant for like children, but he ended up working with Matsuura through Sony Music. Well, he did a lot of illustration work through Sony Music. He did a lot of stuff for advertising. He did a lot of graphic design work for them. But then what ended up happening is he met Matsuura through the scene, and that was also when a lot of artists from the time were getting funds from Sony Music, because they were working with Sony on what would eventually become the PlayStation project. So with PlayStation, they were recruiting less from people who were like strictly game makers. A lot of people in the arcades who were making strict video games. So they were looking for people who were making more or less kind of interactive media, stuff that was a little more experimental, a little more kind of broad, and just trying all sorts of stuff. So from there, they ended up forming what's called the Seven Sound Company, or Nara Onsha, to make Parappa the Rapper, which a lot of people consider to be the first modern rhythm game. So that was released in mid-1997. It was a huge global hit. And from there, they made a number of other games. They made Lenny, which is technically Parappa 2, but there was a strict Parappa the Rapper 2 that came out in 2001. They made Vib Ribbon, which was notable for being a game that was like, you could insert your own CD and generate your own levels. And they also made sort of a spin-off of Vib Ribbon, which was called Mojib Ribbon. It was more of like a poetry game. You were making your own poems, and the characters would kind of text-to-speech rap the songs. You could also share them with people over the internet as well. But after this came, and after the 2000s, the company more or less vanished into Tamagotchi hell, and they didn't really make a lot of stuff until one game, which we'll mention at the very end. But in 1997, a lot of interesting things were happening. This was the launch of the original Beatmania game. So this was a game that Konami released in the late 1997. It was more or less a DJ simulation game. You had 5 keys and a turntable, and the keys acted more or less like a simulation of like the synthesizer as well as like a drum machine as well. And you had to go and hit these cues to the music. Let's hope this actually works. Good. It's not particularly loud because it's playing out of the projector, but you can see normally the keys aren't numbered because this is from like an instructional tape. So you can see these keys are falling toward the bottom, and you hit them and you receive a grade. So this is the first true rhythm action game. Konami in a lot of ways did invent this, so they were true about that, but they got very cocky about it. But a lesser known game from that period, released a week after the original Beatmania in arcades, was a game for the Sega Saturn called DJ Wars, which was developed by Exit and published by Spike. In a lot of ways, this was actually much more of a literal DJ simulator game. So if this clip loads without an ad. So in this game, you are going out, you pick one of 5 DJs, and you pick up the 7 tracks, and you're actually going out into the club and you're DJing. So you actually have to go and crossfade between songs, adjust the BPM, do a bunch of effects and stuff, and you're more or less reading the rhythm and the mood of the crowd. And it's like more like your actual DJing. Instead of just kind of playing the song, you're playing the song and also kind of feeling the vibe of the entire event. This was kind of a one-off game though, it really didn't make a splash, but I just found it interesting regardless. So right after 1997, you had the big arcade version kind of boom. So Beatmania was the start of what's called the Beamani simulation unit in Konami. They were more or less flowered out from Beatmania, and any game that was similar to it, they put within the team called the Beamani team. So one of their earliest kind of games along with this is a game called Poppin' Music, which was much more of a broad game. The original Beatmania was very, very gritty, very underground, focused on hip-hop and R&B and electronic and techno. While Poppin' Music was more or less just kind of about like friends having fun. And the game was originally designed to be played by 2 people. So there were 2 people on each side of the cabinet in the red one kind of middle. But eventually Konami just started developing the charts to be played by 1 person because a lot of people were trying to challenge themselves. So here's some gameplay of that. This is from one of the newer versions. You can see, oh, of course it plays in that. So you can see it's a similar kind of Beatmania style game in which the keys fall toward the bottom, but in this case they're multicolored. And there's little animated avatar characters. There's hundreds of them across the series, and they all have really unique designs. And indeed, it also started the trend of songs from Beatmania would often feature in Poppin' Music, and kind of the reverse as well. Like kind of a phenomenon known as crossing it over. So Konami was building this whole ecosystem of songs that would kind of be cut across all the series. So you might recognize a song and be able to play it in another game, or if you favored one game, but you didn't realize that it wasn't in the game, you just kind of wait until it gets crossed over. Okay, no ad for you. And of course you have, let me just get a drink quick. I'm doing a lot of talking, so.
Doing great, dude.
This is literally my first panel ever, so I'm doing my best. Thank you. So in the spring of 1998, Yoshihiko Ota, a game producer at Konami Tokyo, ended up coming up with the idea of Dance Dance Revolution. So a game in which you're kind of moving your body and pressing these buttons to the beat. And at first he was like, his colleagues were like, no one's gonna wanna play a game like that. But then he was like, well, people go to karaoke and they sing badly, why can't people pay money and then go and dance badly in this game? So initially they thought it was gonna be like more of a hand game, but then they ended up settling with the idea of having a cross and having you kind of coordinate your feet to the beat of the music. So in the early days of DDR, which is a whole other panel I can do, people not only play for what's called score, but they also did a lot of freestyle routines. And I'm gonna play a clip of that afterward. It's also important to note that one of the big draws for the early DDR games is Konami made a partnership with a company called Toshiba EMI, like a big record label, which had a series of CDs called Dance Mania. So the deal was, okay, we'll promote your CDs, but we want to use that music in our games. So in a lot of ways, it was kind of like, featuring a song in a TV show. Well, we're gonna feature this song in this game that people are gonna go out and buy the CDs to hear the full song. So it was a great cross-advertising sort of thing. So here's some gameplay of a DDR freestyle video from like forever ago. Maybe like 2001 at most. There's a ton of these on YouTube. So the goal isn't really like actually playing the game. Like, they're still hitting the arrows, but the goal is more or less about impressing the crowd. There'd be whole freestyle tournaments where you'd be graded based on your performance versus just like, oh, you hit every note perfectly, stuff like that. Oh yeah. So they kept flowering outward. You had Guitar Freaks and Drum Mania, which is like in a lot of ways the original rock band. So Guitar Freaks came first, with Drum Mania coming a little later, like within the year. And what was notable about this game is that the two machines could actually do what's called a session. So one player could play the guitar, one player could play the bass, and the other could go and play on the drums. You could play the same song together, like you were in a real band. It's a feature that still continues to the modern versions of this day. There are a lot of other strange little B-Money spin-offs here. You have 3 here. You have Dance Maniacs, you have Keyboard Mania Third Mix, and you also have, Keyboard Mania, that's just the third mix picture. You also had a strange game called Para Para Paradise. So we have short little clips of each of these. Hopefully there is no ad. So Dance Maniacs was unique because instead of having arrows that you press, they're actually IR sensors that you could wave the top or the bottom of with your hands or feet to sort of create your own dance routine. You could more or less kind of play the way you want, sort of make your own sort of dance routine. And there were only like 3 or 4 of these before the series ended, and it shares a lot of DNA with DDR. A lot of the same songs were in there. And here's some gameplay of Keyboard Mania. This game I like to think is the ultimate counter to, why don't you just learn a real instrument? Because this is indeed the entire 46 key or whatever keyboard. You could either play half of it or you could play what's called real mode, which you can play all the keys. And I've seen some people play real mode. It's really hard. There were only like 3 of these, I believe, but notably, you could also session this with Guitar Freaks and Drum Mania, so you could have a guitar, bass, keyboard, and drums. But that was so complicated that very few arcades could ever really do this. And here's some footage of Para Para Paradise. So Para Para was a Japanese kind of synchronized club dance trend that was really popular in Japan. I'm not sure why the volume is so low. Is there any way to turn off the projector?
It should be a setting though to make it affect the TV itself or something like that.
Yeah, you have to configure your computer for output to the
Do you have an RCA?
Yeah, I do.
You should do that.
That's what.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It'll make your life way better.
Okay, let me just, yeah, I can totally do that. Try that now.
You gotta set it on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Technical difficulties, people, just give me a second. Speakers, Century Audio.
Yeah.
That's the,
It's probably your headphones.
Oh, yeah, it just changed. So. Speakers, ViewSonic HD audio driver.
No, you still have to project.
Oh, okay. So you want the speaker system?
You want the
Speakers. Headphones.
It's headphones too.
Yeah. That's a lot better. Right. So here you can see some gameplay of this. Unfortunately, this game ended around the end of the power trend, which went from like 1997 until 2000. So this came out in like 2000. So there were only 2 versions of this. And there were even going to be like a multi-person cabinet called the Deluxe Cabinet, but that was only really shown at Konami trade shows and it never really came out to the public. So there were even more little spin-offs. You had Martial Beat over here, which I'll go and show you a clip of the intro. Martial Beat was a cross between DDR and like a fitness routine. So essentially you were doing a martial arts routine to Dance Mania music. Like imagine doing punches and kicks and stuff, but you're like an instructor is yelling at you while you're also listening to Eurobeat. It's ridiculous. It does use Konami 573 hardware, but you can never find this in public anymore. It's extremely rare. Although this is the PlayStation clip, so you can in theory play this at home. I'm not sure how you would get the feedback though.
Does it have like a special controller or something?
I'm not quite sure about that actually. And here's Mambo A Go-Go, which is a one-off game, capitalizing a lot on, in 1999-2000, there was a big global sort of rave about Latin music. So this was Konami's attempt to kind of cash in on that. There were a lot of different covers of Latin songs, and even some Konami originals that had a Latin flair to them. Probably less than a dozen left of these in the entire world at this point. A lot of these games are quite rare, like often collectors will keep them alive, but like barely. And of course you have a lot of Beatmania releases at home. Here you have the Beatmania 5-key controller, which you can find like every book off and hard off in Japan. They're quite cheap, but if you import them, they're gonna cost like 50 bucks, of course. And what was neat about a lot of the home releases of Beatmania, Poppin' Music, and Guitar Freaks and DDR, they use what's called the key and append-disc system. So you'd buy the original Beatmania, and then if you wanted to go and get some more songs or play like the latest version, you'd essentially go and buy an expansion pack. So the append disc, you go and plug in the key disc, and you press disc change, and then you swap out your disc for the append disc. So essentially it was a way for Konami to go and sell additional versions without, like, at a reduced price to people, while also trying to keep the sales of the base game high. So they did that for all the main series they had at the time. And of course they had a litany of other home controllers. Over here on the right you have the Poppin' arcade version, which is like the full-size controller. I don't even really need this, I can kind of project most of my voice, but we'll see. The buttons are extremely loud. I heard it played, and it's extremely, like, it's deafening. On the top left you have the much more common Poppin' Minicon, which you can get for like 50 bucks nowadays. In the lower left you have the Poppin' B-Mouse, which, true to its name, was a mouse that had an entire Poppin' music controller built into it, and it had its own PC version of Poppin' too.
Windows XP.
Yes.
I like that it's pop stuff.
Yeah, it's very cute, isn't it?
This is like Set Mania pop.
Yeah, got
I
it.
would use that mouse to play Daily Driver.
Okay.
It's a ball mouse like
Imagine playing the disc
I
expansion
promise
thing.
you.
Oh, I wish, yeah.
That would be.
Yeah.
The Project Zero with that.
Oh yeah.
There were also a lot of like standalone handheld Beatmania games. You had a lot of like Tiger Electronic style games. There were like 12.5 of those. You had, by the Game Boy Color, you had Beatmania, Poppin', and DDR versions, and some of them had their own little controllers you could attach to it. I think the Beatmania ones also had like a little scratch module you could attach to it too. There was also one for the Wonder Swan, which is fun because the Wonder Swan, you could play it horizontally as well as vertically, and you could attach a little scratch to the corner. So, you know, for a handheld version, it was quite close to the arcade in a lot of ways. It's a kind of a curious version there. So, because of the boom of Beatmania games, you had a ton of competitors, and a lot of them came from this company called Jellico, or Japan Leisure Company Limited. And due to a lot of business fumbles, they were acquired by a company from Hong Kong, and they kind of hobbled onward from there. But here you can see 3 of their Beatmania knockoffs. You have on the left you had Stepping Stage, in the middle you had Rockin' Tread, and on the right you had VJ. And these are quite rare, so it's kind of hard to find footage of these, but here's some footage of Stepping Stage, which is a very obvious DDR knockoff. So unlike DDR, which is like 4 arrows and a cross, in this game there's upper left, middle as well as lower ones on each side. So it's like you're kind of like stepping around like this. It's kind of awkward in a lot of ways. And then you have the gameplay video in the center. There is a PS2 version of this called Step and Selection. I do recommend looking up the background videos for them. They're hilarious. You also have Rock and Tread, which was a rhythm game with a single button and a foot pedal. And you more or less like, you're kind of like, you know, sort of rubbing your belly and like scratching your head at the same time. And you select kind of like the guitar, bass, or keyboard parts, and you're more or less kind of playing with your friends and sort of play like in a band. But it was infringed on a bunch of Konami's patents, and it made Konami quite mad. And here is some gameplay of VJ, which had a ridiculous cabinet of its own. You can see the 3 screens just for the background video, and then a single screen below for the Beatmania style gameplay. Because of legal troubles that Konami sued upon for Jellico had to, like a lot of the arcade operators had to destroy these cabinets. So this is maybe one of 2 in the entire world that are still remaining from the year 2000. Wow, really rare relic. So here's the first instance of Konami trying to go and like flex their legal muscle. So around when the Beamani boom was occurring, they did a bunch of key patents that we're going to refer to. So the main one they were trying to go and get Jellico for with Rock and Tread as well as with VJ was called the Music Game Interface patent. So a system where a note fell toward a judgment line and then you press the key to make a sound, or a key sound. And they used that in order to go and get rid of a lot of the competition at the time. You can go and see their settlement here. Because of a lot of the legal disputes that Jellico was getting into, and also some questionable licensing decisions, getting some really big names for the Stepping Selection series, that's when they got acquired by that one Hong Kong company who then handled a lot of their legal disputes. Around the same time, you also had games like Paka Paka Passion. There were 3 of these. There were 2 main ones in like a remix version. It was built by employees who left IREM, and then they went ahead and they made this music game, which was notable because of the fact that it wasn't really like a strict cabinet you could buy. You could put it into any cabinet that had like a certain configuration of 4 buttons, and you could play the game. So similar to Rock and Tread, you could more or less pick your instrument part and then verse off against like a CPU player. See if I can get a gameplay. Yeah, here we go.
Now choose your part.
This is gameplay from the 3rd one, which is like more or less kind of a remix sort of thing. See if I can skip through a bit.
Are you ready?
So versus Beatmania, which is more or less about you kind of DJing in like a pretend club. In this, you're more or less like kind of dancing off against an opponent, trying to overwhelm them and getting as many pucks onto the other side as they can. That's why it's called Paka Paka Passion. Paka Paka Passion. Yeah, exactly. And then, unlike a lot of the Beatmania games, which were like streaming audio from like a CD, this played it pretty much all from the system board. It was all MIDI, so that's why it was able to be installed in so many arcade cabinets. It was very, very modular in that way. Meanwhile, in the world of literal DJing, you had Sega's Kraken DJ, which was a game all about turntablism. So in this game, you had 2 analog turntables and a crossfader, and you follow the cues. You got to put the record in the right position. You had to go and like scratch them in the direction that it says. This game is extremely difficult. I played this over at Game Underground in Waltham, Mass. like years ago, and I could not really get a hold of it. If I had some more time with it, probably, but I'm just impressed by what Sega was doing. They were really trying to go and innovate in this sphere. I really applaud them for trying something this ballsy. I love the visuals too. They're very Saturn, even though I believe it was on slightly better hardware.
Do they still have it?
And then of course you have Taiko no Tatsujin, which you've probably seen at every anime con ever, and I also will have that in the game room tomorrow. Game all about simulating the drumming of taiko drums, a Japanese pastime, to a lot of J-pop, Namco originals, and more. And this series still goes to today. I believe there's pretty much yearly entries, and there's also a big arcade presence for this game. You also had the Busta Groove series made by Metro Corporation. There were 2 main ones of these, and then a lesser-known arcade release of the second one, as well as a spin-off that had slightly different gameplay for the PS2. Here's some gameplay of the first game.
So
So in this game, you're more or less following the cues on the screen. You enter in the ones in the center, and then you can press the little cue button on the right to the 4th beat, and it gets increasingly complicated.
So many adults even know.
Well, that's the point I'm trying
Really
to.
have rhythm heaven. Okay.
We're going to talk about it.
What?
We're going to talk about it, yeah. Notable about this game is they recruited what's called Avex Corporation, which was a massive J-pop sort of label at the time to produce these like stellar tracks. And they also recruited for a couple tracks Stockape and Waterman, which was the British team that brought you, among other things, Spin Me Right Round Like a Record, as well as Never Gonna Give You Up.
Yeah.
Here's some gameplay from the lesser-known spin-off Dance Summit 2001. Of course, there's an ad. Gotta get that money somehow, Marvel. Please play. Skip. I don't know why you can't skip. Sorry, come on, skip.
Try reloading it or swapping more slides.
Okay. So I'm not sure if it's gonna let me play the clip, but this game, unlike the other one, which was you having a dance battle with another person, in this one you're actually having a dance with a team of dancers. So the goal is to either synchronize with your team or to try to stand out and be the #1 dancer in your group. It didn't really do as well as the other ones, unfortunately. And what's curious is that within the same year, the same company made this game, Britney's Dance Beat, which was capitalizing on the then very new pop star Britney Spears. This game has a total of 5 songs. So you can burn through the content in this game in like half an hour, and you can't even really dance as Britney Spears. Like, you activate like a favorite mode, and you get dance her for like 5 seconds, and you're back to dancing as like a background dancer. Thanks, guys. $50 stolen.
She's legendary. She likes summer.
So because of the trend, there were also a lot of weird one-off games. You have Unison from Tecmo, which is like a Charlie's Angels style game, but fighting against an evil dictatorship. You had Guitar Man by the company Enis that was all about like being a musical superhero that defeats aliens, and they made a very notable series after this. Dog of Bay, which is like a furry cabaret game. It really defies words, and there is an English translation of that. TV DJ, made by Sony, which is like a, I wouldn't say it's strictly like a rhythm game or a music game. It's more like a puzzle game about remixing kind of TV shows live. It's really quirky. Then you had Mad Maestro, which was not only notable for being a game about classical music in the rhythm game kind of context, but also it uses the pressure sensitivity of the PS2 buttons. You had to kind of like conduct the orchestra at different sort of vigors by pressing like softly, medium, or hard. It's really hard to get used to, and if you're not using an OEM PS2 controller, it's basically impossible. Then notably, you had some more well-known games. You had Space Channel 5 from, okay, I don't know why it keeps playing the ads. I have YouTube Premium, people. And I don't, because normally it just kind of lets me press the button and skip it. But everyone's kind of seen. Sorry?
You get one ad.
Oh yeah, that's true. Wait 20 seconds while I kind of blather about it. So in this game, you're playing as the space reporter Ulala, who in this kind of retro future 1960s space situation, she's fighting against the evil aliens, Marillions, which will, as she says, they're forcing people to dance.
Terrible fate.
Mm-hmm. Okay, please play. Here we go.
Beam on the aliens.
Okay. Let's shoot. Kick, kick, kick. Left. Shoot, shoot, shoot. Kick, kick, left.
They did 2 entries of this along with like a DVD kind of remake of the original as well. And there's a VR game too. And you have Rez, which in a lot of ways is like a space age version of like an Otoki style game. It's a 3D rail shooter that is all techno influenced, in which every one of your shots is synced to the beat, and everything quantizes and synchronizes up and harmonizes, like an Otoki, but like a 2001 version of it. This game has pretty much been available on all modern platforms since the very kind of launch of it. Every 10 years they make a new version of it. And in particular, it was very inspired by the artist Kavinsky, who was kind of interested in the idea of a concept called synesthesia, or being able to like see sounds. Really great soundtrack too. Lesser known games, you had Rhythm and Face, which really defies description. So this game is like Rhythm Me Maker. So it shows you how to go make the face and you have to copy it exactly in order to score. But I've never been able to understand this game. The only notable thing about it, beyond its crazy graphics, is that the art designer of this, Osamu Sato, is also the same guy who worked on the legendary game LSD Dream Emulator. This game feels like I'm being reprogrammed by the government or something, honestly.
What console was that game?
It's a PS1 game.
That was like,
And speaking of Parappa knockoffs, here's one of the most notorious ones. It's called Jung Rhythm, which actually got an English translation really recently. This was made by Altron Corporation, who's really only well known for making the game that would later inspire Zuma. They made a game called Magnetica, I believe. This came out about a year after the original Parappa. Instead of playing as a rabid dog trying to get the girl, you're playing as a little girl named Vanilla who's just trying to have a nice day. So this is like midway through the game where she's trying to learn from a guy who's literally called Picasso. This is like the only rhythm game on the Saturn too. It was really, really weird. Hilltop Translations did an English translation of this really recently, but I played this like 10 years ago originally, and I had no idea what was happening.
now you do not know what's happening in English.
So, Beatmania was doing real well, that they were already on to Beatmania 2. So, Konami originally wanted to release two versions of the Beatmania 2 cabinet. There was like a standard version, there was the deluxe version that was known as 2DX. But after they made the second one, Substream, they pretty much scrapped that idea because the deluxe ones were selling better anyway. There wasn't really a lot of new content at first. A lot of it was recycled from the still ongoing regular Beatmania series. But eventually by the 8th mix of 2DX, they phased out Beatmania with Beatmania the Final by 2002. In order to boost the popularity of the game, Konami did a similar thing they were doing with the Guitar Freaks and Drum Mania session. You could session 2DX second style or Substream with DDR second mix. So one person could be kind of DJing the music and the other person could be dancing to it. That was the only version they kind of did that with though. And it's really hard to find someone who has that set up nowadays. And of course they went and updated the controller as well. Instead of 5 keys, you had 2 extra keys. This is the PS2 version of the controller, or this is the Japanese variant of it, more on that later. So, as they were building the Bimani division, they were also expanding Konami's internal sound team. So, from left to right, you had Ryo Nagumo, which was one of the original sound producers of the 5-key Beatmania series. You had Takayuki Ishikawa, who was a big name in the 2DX series. You had Akira Yamaoka, who is best known for being the composer for the Silent Hill series. You had Naoki Maeda, who is one of the big superstars of the DDR series. You had Jun Mokita, who is one of the main sound producers of the Pop and Music series. And, most importantly, you had Yoshitaka Nishimura there on the far right, who as of this year is actually now the president of the newly minted Konami Amusement Arcade Company. So he's risen all the way up to the top, baby. And two of the most notable, not necessarily in-house Konami composers are Ryu on the left and Korsuke. Back in like 2002 or so, they both participated in a Beatmania song contest to get a song in 2DX 4th style, and they both won as high school students. And they still contribute songs to Beatmania to this day. They own their own record labels too. So they also collaborate on songs together as the 4th to commemorate when they got into the industry in 4th style. And Korsuke on the right in particular has performed in New England a number of times. He's a really big name over here in the music game scene. So we're talking a lot about Japan, but what about Korea? So the Korean arcade scene wasn't really as strong as the Japanese arcade scene because in a lot of ways, arcades were viewed as like a delinquent place and parents didn't really let their kids kind of go there, especially teenagers. But there were still a number of Korean popular games over there. You had Pump It Up, which was a major competitor to DDR, came out about a year later. It wasn't necessarily a ripoff because they basically came up with the idea at roughly the same time, just in different countries. And it was notable because instead of being a cross, it was 4 diagonals and a center button. It was a lot more focused on K-pop and Korean music in general, and it was also a big freestyle community, just like the DDR. So I'm going to play a clip of the infamous DDR Level Asian video, which, despite the title, it's a pro play of a guy playing Pump It Up.
First one was
This guy is doing doubles play, so he's playing across both pads. I only found out recently the guy playing is actually the guy who made the step chart. And this was an exhibition. So Andamiro didn't really have a lot of notable in-house composers. A lot of their early pump internal music that wasn't the K-pop stuff or the covers was by an internal band called Banya, which is made up of 3 guys named Yap, MS Goon, and then others. And then later on, the band disbanded, and Yap was kind of released his own music as a solo artist. Nowadays, there isn't really like a strict sound team in Andamiro, which is the company that made Pump It Up, as compared to like the Bimani sound team for Konami. But you know, it's a mix of like commissioned songs as well as like all the K-pop licenses they've historically relied on. Korea also had their own flavor of Beatmania called Easy2DJ, which had very similar gameplay to Beatmania 5 key, but with a foot pedal. Here's some gameplay of the third. Notably, because also featured a lot of hold notes in its charts very early on, and Beatmania wouldn't even touch that until the 2010s. You can't really see the foot pedal in action here, but there's like a lane on the far right that's green whenever there's a footnote. So Konami thought that was a really great idea. Oh, okay, that's another slide. So there were a lot of notable Easy2DJ composers. From left to right, you had ST, Planet Boom, who was a composer as well as a producer of the game, or at least for another game series. You had Mako in the middle. You had ND Lee. You had Kruve, who now is a sound director for the game company Pearl Abyss, which makes the MMO Black Desert Online, as well as the upcoming game Crimson Desert. And you also had Forte Escape. And many of these composers would go on to feature Korean music game products, as you'll find out soon. So Konami went and made their own flavor of an Easy2DJ style game. This is Beatmania 3, which was Beatmania 5 key, but with a foot pedal. Just completely like, yeah, we can do that. Screw you. And beyond that, it was cool because you could actually save your scores onto a PS1 memory card and bring it around to different arcades and track your progress. And a giant deluxe cabinet, just like 2DX. So, while Konami was here, what were they doing in Korea? Yeah, they were indeed in Korea. They released a couple of the Beatmania games in Korea, I believe, as Beat Stage. And then they did kind of release 5 key and a couple of them in America and stuff called Hip Hop Mania, but it really didn't make a lot of. They cut out? Okay. But for the most part in Korea, they also had a lot of. They had a couple of DDR games that were released in Korea, but for the most part, it was a pump territory. But old heads to the DDR scene might know Third Mix well, because when the game was getting popular in the 2000s, for the most part, Konami wasn't really like easily going to sell them to Americans. So to meet the demand in arcades, a lot of operators would go and get bootleg Korean Third Mix kind of cabinets. So a lot of old heads are familiar with the songs from Third Mix because of that. And notably also, there was a dancing version of Easy2DJ called Easy2Dancer, which was cool. Let's see if we can get the. What's cool about this game is it actually had 2 motion sensors. You actually had to wave with your hands for certain charts. There were, I think, 3 or 4 of these. So now we're moving into 2001 to 2006, the midpoint of the timeline here. So by then, they were actually bothering to release 2DX in homes. So starting in 2002, which was about like 3 years after 2DX was released at arcades in 1999, and they started releasing the games like every 3/4 of a year after that. And sometimes the gap was like 4 to 5 months. So to kind of make it up for the gap, they often would feature exclusive songs, preview songs from like the recent games at the time, and also you had one mix that actually included pro play videos or tatsujins of like really impressive play. Meanwhile, at this period, Konami was suing again. Let the lawsuits begin. So they sued Andamiro over Pump It Up. They claimed they were violating what's called the Dance Simulation Input Patent, filed in 1999. So aka the idea of having 4 pressure-sensitive panels and a cross layout, and then you press down the arrows as visual indicators scroll by on the screen to the music. But Andamiro proved that there were games where you stepped on the panels to the music already, and they pointed to a game released in 1997 called Spider Stomping. in which music played and the icons flashed and you stomped on the spiders. So they successfully proved that there was prior art and that Konami didn't invent this kind of game. So they were able to continue the Pump It Up series, and that game runs concurrently to DDR to this day. And we just talked about EZ2DJ a moment ago. Konami sued them as well. They sued the company that made this, Amuse World, twice. They sued them in 2001 in Seoul, and they demanded 1.2 billion won, and the court ruled in Konami's favor. But there was sort of a loophole in the clause that was like, okay, you can't make new hardware. So what ended up happening is they were able to go and make new games for that hardware. For about 5 to 6 years after that, they had to use the old Pentium 3 cabinets in order to go and make new mixes of the game. But the Konami was like, are you sure about that? And they sued again in 2007. They had to pay like 10 times the amount, almost 12 billion won. They had to stop production of the game. And then later on, what ended up happening is fans continued the series, and you could find a version of it in arcades now. The big action in a lot of Korean gaming scene was in what's called the PC bongs, or the internet cafes. So for like an hourly or daily fee, this isn't really as much a thing in the West as it is in Asia. You can go and rent time on like a gaming PC at one of these net cafes. So you can go play like an RPG, or in this case, you can go play a music game. So for like, you can go and play these 3 games. For example, you had the DJ Max series, and there were 2 main seasons of that in net cafes. You had O2 Jam, which was another Beatmania style game. And you also had Audition Online, which was like Bust a Groove, but with a bigger focus on like chat rooms and social features and like dress up stuff. And notable about DJ Max in particular is when EZ2DJ finally died, a lot of the composers from that series moved on to DJ Max. So a lot of people consider DJ Max to be more or less the successor to EZ2DJ. And I don't really have gameplay videos of these. We could see up on the top left you have some gameplay of O2 Jam. On the lower left you have DJ Max, and on the right you have Audition Online. Meanwhile, Konami was still trying to release their PS2 releases of 2DX, but there was some trouble going on that took a long break after 6 style, and the 7th style had a lot of expensive Eurobeat licenses and a lot of prominent like Western trance electronic licenses. So they held a pre-order campaign that was like, okay, you guys need to pre-order like anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 copies before we're even gonna produce this game. So they met the goal, and they were able to go and release the game in 2004, and they were able to go and release a couple more of those. I should also note there were a number of pop-in games as well released at the time. Continuing from like, they released up to 6 on the PS1, and then from like 7th until 14th, they released them on the PS2. Now for the last third of this presentation, you have 2006 to 2010. This is where we're getting into a lot of the games familiar here, the Western competition. We have Guitar Hero, as well as a little game called In the Groove. So, the company that made the original Guitar Hero was called Harmonix Music Systems. They are based out of Cambridge, Mass. They came out of like the MIT Media Lab, a lot of the multimedia stuff that was coming out at the time. Their early stuff wasn't really like games. It was a lot of music interactivity software. They made like sort of a webcam thing for Epcot. They made a PC game called The Axe that was more or less like kind of a music toy. Their early games were all about, like I think their early ethos was all about making sure that non-musicians could enjoy the experience of being able to feel like they're creating music or interacting with music and resonating with it. Their first proper game projects were 2 games called Frequency and then later on Amplitude, which were published by Sony as first-party games. So in this game, you more or less move between different instrument parts, and then you have to go and complete the track and keep it going until the end of the song. So you had 1 part for drums, 1 for vocals, a couple for synths. You had to keep the track going throughout the entire thing. Frequency, I think, was like around the launch period of the PS2, and then Amplitude was a couple years later. They were both first-party games, and Sony did their best to market them, but they really didn't have a lot of broad appeal. Like the original Frequency was very techno-focused, and Amplitude had a lot more like kind of modern, like mainstream pop. It really just didn't work out. Funny enough, they did make a number of games for Konami before their later legal troubles with them. They made a couple of karaoke revolution games, I think 3 main ones and then 2 based on American Idol. Really straightforward, they're pretty much regular karaoke games. Funny enough, some of them actually did support the DDR dance pad. You can actually kind of dance while you're singing, but it's really awkward because they scroll kind of horizontally like instead of vertically like you would expect. And then Guitar Hero happened. So this game was released in 2005. It was very explicitly based on Guitar Freaks. So what happened was there was a company called Red Octane that was making a lot of DDR third-party mats versus the Konami official soft mats. And they were seeing that Konami was selling a lot of controllers for the Guitar Freaks home games, but they weren't releasing their own version of Guitar Freaks for America. So they went to Harmonix and was like, why don't you make a game and we'll make a guitar controller and we'll release it in a bundle. So they made this game on a tight budget and they released this for $40. They weren't expecting this game to be a big success at all. Like when this was shown off at E3, the big entertainment kind of conference that is pretty famous, they were showing this not in the main hall, but in Kenosha Hall, which was the big, like it was kind of like more or less like a bazaar. There was all sorts of strange stuff in there. But the game created a lot of buzz, and then when it was released, it was an unexpected smash hit, and it was extremely profitable. So they went ahead and Harmonix made 2 main ones, and they also made a game called Rock the 80s. It was like a DLC sort of game. Meanwhile, with DDR, the last mainline DDR game in arcades for a long while was released in late December of 2002. And there were a lot of hints that this was more or less the end of the original reign of DDR. And there were a lot of graphics on the cabinets that actually said, like, this is basically the end. They weren't explicitly saying, we're not making the game anymore. They were just very heavily hinting, okay, we're done here. So people thought that DDR was over. So people were very hungry for more. Therefore, a Westerner went and filled the gap. In the Groove was a very community-born game. So there was a company called Rockstar Games, made by this guy named Chris Foy. And the guy on the right over here, Kyle Ward, came from the Stepmania scene, like the DDR simulator scene. He made a lot of songs and he was making charts. And they built this game In the Groove on the Stepmania 3.5 engine. So the original In the Groove game was more or less sold as an upgrade kit. You could take your old DDR cabinet and you could replace all the graphics and replace the internal machine and use the original dance pads that you already had. And in a lot of ways, it felt like a fan-driven version of DDR with a lot harder content as well. So there were 2 main versions of In the Groove, 1 and 2. And then there was also what's called a Dedicab. You could buy a machine that was dedicated just to playing In the Groove 2. There was also a PS2 port that had its own soft mat released by Red Octane. So that attracted the ire of a certain massive company known as Konami. This is one of the most infamous Konami lawsuits in the entire fandom of music games. So Konami Corp versus Rockstar Games Inc. Red Octane and Mad Catz Inc. Mad Catz was only involved in this lawsuit because they made a game for the GameCube called MC Groove's Dance Craze that I don't even have feature footage of it. It's not worth talking about really at all. It's just a complete piece of trash. Konami's main issue with this when they sued in 2006 was they wanted to prevent Rockstar from making those upgrade kits. They claimed that this was infringing on their dance game patents while still using the hardware that they still kind of owned and had the patent on. So there was a settlement in 2006, and as part of that, Konami still owns the In the Groove trademarks to this day. There was going to be a 3rd version of In the Groove, and unfortunately that never really saw the light of day, but if you know where you're going, you can definitely find the content and the charts for this. And Kyle Ward had a very illustrious career after this. So guess who's back? Konami recognized the demand, and DDR Supernova came out in mid-2006. It was the first major DDR arcade game to get a completely global release, and it ran on PlayStation 2 hardware, which helped make the console ports later. The game was really off sync at first and had to get a bunch of updates in order to fix that. And there was a lot of quality issues with the American cabinets because it was made by the sketchy manufacturer called Betson Enterprises that had really bad pad quality compared to the Japanese cabinets. American fans were quite excited, as evidenced by this music video. can find the full thing on YouTube. I just love this music video so much. This is also around the same time that Konami was upping their B-Money game. So they made what's called the E-Amusement system, which was Konami's online score-saving system, and also their way of delivering updates to the cabinets. So it debuted in 2002 for a non-music game called Mahjong Fight Club, and then it started to be used with B-Money games around like 2DX Night Style, and then also the first DDR to use it was Supernova. So essentially, players could go up to their arcades and they could buy these cards with magnet stripes to log into the game, and then a couple years later, they were upgraded to NFC cards. You could just tap it onto certain spots. It was only available in Japan because, for the most part, you had to pay a subscription to Konami, and you also had to go and enter into a profit-sharing agreement with Konami, and then it just was a no-go for American arcades. They were still making a lot of 2DX home releases at the time. They were progressing here with 2DX Red, Happy Sky, and Distorted. Because of the success of Guitar Hero, Activision went ahead and acquired the Guitar Hero publisher Red Octane, and they made 1 billion games from then. They really farmed up the Guitar Hero series. Meanwhile, Harmonix was sitting pretty because they were acquired by MTV Games, and they went and released the original Rock Band, which after the original success of the game, they were like, okay, let's expand it from just a guitar, let's go have drums, and let's also have vocals. So everything was coming together. And then EA published this game so they could have the ability to get into stores and have the full band kit available for purchase at a very affordable $150. Unfortunately, you know how the story goes. Konami went in and they sued Harmonix and MTV Games over their patent for what's called the Combination Instrument Simulation patent, also filed in the late 1990s. So the idea of having a guitar controller with fret buttons and you strum and you press the falling notes to the timing of the music, or like a drum controller with the pads linked to like a note highway. So they settled out of court in 2010, and they were able to go and make a couple more Rock Band games from there. So the big question was Konami really trying to compete? So they released these Guitar Freaks and Drum Mania in the early 2000s, but they really didn't try that hard to release anything in Japan. And that's why they ended up getting swooped up, and that's how Guitar Hero happened. So there were some rumors that the publisher Working Designs, which you might know from making games like, localizing games like Grandin and Lunar, they wanted to make their own versions of Guitar Freaks. And the whole gimmick of their imagined versions was, oh, you'd buy a guitar that was the famous guitar used by this famous guitarist, you could unlock his songs in the game, which would have gotten really expensive, I'll tell you that. And he also claimed, the guy who ran the company, Vic Ireland, said there were patent issues with the controller that Harmonix made for their guitar games. So, Konami, during the lawsuit, a little after, they made this game called Rock Revolution for the PS3 and 360. They really barely tried with this game. They didn't make a full band kit for it. They partnered with, they outsourced the game to a British developer named Zoe Mode. And if you look up footage of this game, it's just really, really budget and really, they didn't try that hard with it. All the songs are covers. And it litters used game stores to this day. But there were also some claims that there was already a drum game out on the market. With this curious game called MTV Drumscape, released in 1997. But in a lot of ways, it was like a karaoke drumming game. So the screen just shows the name of the song. It doesn't even show you what to do. You have to know how to play drums to play the game. It's more or less just a way to show off in public. It was barely even a game. It was more like just a jukebox. But it looks so similar to Drum Mania that people guess this is why they didn't try releasing Drum Mania in the US. And, like I said before, they tried to go and release the Beat Mania games as well as Hip Hop Mania and stuff in different countries, but it didn't really stick. Although, curiously, there was a release of 5-key Beat Mania in Europe in 2000, which was a couple years after the home versions were happening over in Japan. And there was a weird kind of variant of the controller that was only ever seen in Europe, too. And there were a number of European pop licenses that later ended up being released in the game Going Global, which is one of the app-in discs that I mentioned before. And, of course, there's Beat Mania US, which came out in 2006 between the release of Guitar Hero and then later on Rock Band. This is a $40 game with a redesigned home controller, the 2DX style controller, and it featured a bunch of American pop covers and remixes and stuff. But the game is a weird mix of hey, remember Beat Mania 5-key? And wow, isn't 2DX such a fun game? And it really just was like caught in the middle of all these things, and it didn't really stick that well. And fans only really know it because the controller made a lot of strategic fixes that were common in the original Japanese version of the controller. So that controller is still quite wanted by fans to this day. And there was a version of Pop Music for the Wii, but it wasn't really strictly like the game you would find in the arcades. It was more or less like a casualized version of it. There were only like 4 note lanes, and you're kind of wagging around with the Wiimotes and the nunchuck. And there was a version of it for the Xbox 360 called Beaten Groovy, which I think it was only restricted to 5 buttons, and none of the original characters from the Poppin' series that made the series so famous were in the game. They contracted out another illustrator to make these new portraits, and it was really awkward, and the game was way too easy, and it didn't really appeal to anyone, honestly. It was really weirdly Americanized. There were a lot of PS2 releases of the DDR series, the only series that Konami really tried to go and release American versions of. And curiously enough, though, they had a habit of taking the original releases that they were making in Japan and cutting out like a quarter of the song list and putting in random American music, and then those original songs would be featured in like the next game over. So in a lot of ways, it was screwing over the American fans as well as trying to prevent people from Japan from reverse importing like the game when it was released over in America. There were also a lot of versions for the Xbox. You had 3 to 4 of the Ultra Mix series, which were made by Konami of Hawaii, which used to be called Hudson Soft before Hudson was acquired, and the Hawaii branch went and turned into Konami of Hawaii. And there was also a number of versions for the Xbox 360. What's cool about these games is not only did they feature a lot more of like American music, but also they featured fans in the song list. They had a number of contests through the website broadjam.com, which was like an indie music label company. So they had a number of contests being like, oh, you can get your music in the game. So a number of composers from that actually were people from the community who went on to go and have their own big careers after that. This is also around the time that you had the release of a lot of brand new handhelds, which due to the increase in storage and stuff at the time, you were able to go and have these much more multimedia focused games. One of the most well-known DS rhythm games is the Oendan series, or Os, Tatakae, Oendan, Go, Fight, Cheer Squad. So these were based on male cheerleaders in Japan called Oendan, these really serious guys who stand there and do very stiff kind of dance routines to go cheer on like baseball teams usually. And what's cool about the game is like you had the Oendan on the bottom screen and you had like a comic narrative on the top. So you're more or less cheering on a person in a very strange situation in order to go and help them accomplish their goal. So the first game did so well as an import game because the DS was region-free. You could just import the game and play it. A lot of people were really into it, especially because the last stage was like one of the opening themes for Full Metal Alchemist, you'll see in the next slide. So Nintendo of America was like, why don't we make an American version of Oendan? So their original idea was, why don't they be like disco guys? But then they were like, no one's gonna really want to buy that, so they went ahead and they made them secret agents of dancing and singing. But when they released this game in like 2005, 2006, it really just didn't do well in America. Ironically enough, their Americanized game was a lot more popular in Japan because Japanese people loved the songs that were in the game. It was the Japanese developers picking American songs that were popular in Japan, so of course it was going to sell well in Japan. So it was a lot of big crowd pleasers from that time, a lot of rock stuff, as well as a couple songs from Nintendo of America president Reggie Fils-Aimé's own playlist as well. So they went and made Elite Beat Agents, they made a sequel to Oendan, then the series has been over since then. But it did inspire a certain fan game we'll talk a little bit about later. So here's some gameplay here. It's notable for being one of the original touchscreen music games. So when the circle overlaps on the other circle, you touch it or you go and kind of follow the tracing path there. And depending on your progress on the bottom, it affects the stuff on the top. So in this stage, which is the final stage of the first game, set to Ready, Steady, Go by Larkin Shield, you're stopping a meteor from hitting the Earth. Everyone in the world, including all the people you helped out in the game, have to cheer on to stop the meteor. Really phenomenal game series. I very heartily recommend them. Yes, that's what inspired us, yes. You also had Rhythm Heaven, which was Nintendo's first foray into rhythm games, spurred on by the big popularity in the mid-2000s. This was co-produced by Sunku, who was a J-pop producer who was the guy who runs the J-pop juggernaut known as Hello Project, which is, they're a huge idol music kind of company. So they made a GBA game in 2006, then that game was ported over to arcades with the help of Sega in 2007, and then there was a DS game, which then was released worldwide with localized songs and everything in 2009. And the series, you know, they had Wii games later on. They also are making one for the Nintendo Switch that's coming out next year. Fans are extremely happy about that.
Do you have the arcade one? The arcade machine?
I see some gameplay here. This is from one of the remixes. So every stage is a little different. You're given the instructions on what to do. Whether you're a karate guy punching stuff, whether you're a guy marching in a parade, whether you're a scientist studying little microbes under a dish. In a lot of ways, it was also made by the WarioWare team, so it was a lot of very odd situations that are synced to the music. This game has a big cult following. Oh yeah. Meanwhile, we talked about DJ Max a while ago. There were a lot of games in the DJ Max Portable series, which was more or less a response to, why isn't there a Beatmania in my pocket? So they made a Beatmania style game you could take with you. So the first two games adapted season 1 and 2 of the PC Net Cafe game. And when those games were a big success, they went and made two more. They made one that was more focused to casuals based on the K-pop group Classic Y project. Then they made more for like hardcore players. They made a game called Black Square. Then they also made a game they made Portable 3, which is kind of the bookend of the traditional series. Funny enough, there was an Americanized version of the game called DJ Max Fever that was kind of a weird mashup between 1 and 2, but it was released like way after like a bunch of the games came out here, and it really didn't appeal to anyone. And I remember when I was in high school seeing these at Toys R Us in the bin for like $5 a pop. Wish I'd snapped up one of those. They're worth a lot nowadays. Here's some gameplay of DJ Max Portable 1. And like I said before, a lot of the people who worked on the EC2DJ series went and they made songs for the DJ Max series. So in a lot of ways, it was the kind of direct successor. I played a ton of this in high school. There was also a kind of a third season of DJ Max for PC called DJ Max Trilogy that was released as like a standalone game you could purchase for your computer around like 2009 or so. But of course, you know the story by now. Konami went and they threatened a patent infringement lawsuit against Pentavision, the creators of DJ Max, for the DJ Max series. The lawsuit, though, was settled out of court, and Pentavision had to do a number of things. They had to pay a fee for all the prior DJ Max games to Konami, and then later on when they made an arcade version of the game, they had to go and more or less have exclusive distribution rights to that version of the game in Japan. And they also made a number of curious adjustments to the DJ Max games gameplay-wise that I don't really have a lot of time to get into. Meanwhile, you had the very last version of Poppin' Music released, Poppin' Music 14 Fever. But Konami recognized there was still demand for it, so they went and they made two more games for the PSP, Portable 1 and 2. These corresponded to like 15 and 16, so it was kind of their attempt to kind of keep the party going in a lot of ways. This is also the era where you had the debut of a certain Hatsune Miku in the Project Diva series. So you had the three games that were released on the PSP, as well as the lesser-known kind of original arcade game, before the version you could find at like arcades today. This was also the era of the touchscreen. So you had the debut of the iPhones and a little later on the iPads. So here you could find one of the original iPhone sensations for music games called Tap Tap Revolution. Stop before I get copyright strike. Notably, there was a touchscreen version of DJ Max called DJ Max Technica, and this is actually a picture from one of the few places in America that had an arcade known as 8 on the Break in New Jersey, and the guy who ran that arcade was actually in charge of trying to market this game to American arcade operators, because unlike Konami, they actually wanted to sell this game to Americans. So here you can see a gameplay clip of it. So notable about this game, to get around the Konami patents, instead of objects approaching a line, they have the lines approach the objects. So you had this line that would pass through horizontally, and then you had to go and touch the icons at the line approach. It was a clever way of getting around the patents, while also having a game that could play those key sounds. There were 3 main entries of this one, as well as one for the PlayStation Vita. Around 2008, you had the release of Konami's U-Beat, which was their attempt to kind of get in on the early touchscreen market. So this was like a widescreen monitor that was laid vertically, and you had 16 acrylic sort of touch panels that you could kind of, it was more or less like musical whack-a-mole. When these icons flashed in a certain way to the music, you had to tap them in different sequences. Here's a short gameplay video of the latest version of that.
Ready, go!
Let's actually play this over in the game room tonight. Actually, not tonight, like tomorrow if you're here. Acrylic pads, more or less.
Anything on, there's a single on.
Yeah. This is also the era of the motion control. So up here on the top left, you have the Wii remote and the nunchuck. You had the PS Move, as well as the infamous Kinect. So I'd say the main 2 competitors of this era were Dance Central, a game made by Harmonix in coordination with MTV Games, and then the Just Dance series from Ubisoft. So these games kind of represent what I would consider to be like the rhythm action versus the music game sort of paradigm. So Dance Central was more or less about, they would go and bring in their motion capture people from MTV to go and coordinate dances to these songs they would license. But Just Dance was more about like a party game, in which it wasn't really how well you were doing, it was just kind of you having fun with your friends. And because of the sheer expense of making the Dance Central game, there was only 3 major ones of those, and then one on the Xbox One. And then the series ended from there, but Just Dance is still going to this day. And on the Wii, there were a litany of dance games that I had no time to get into, including featuring some very impressive licenses. Konami did try to make a Kinect game, though, in the form of Dance Masters. So unlike Dance Central, where you're more or less, there are these cards that scroll down, you're supposed to kind of mimic the dance part that coordinates the cards. This is more like directly like a rhythm action game where you have these cues that appear. Your hands or your body parts, you're supposed to kind of be in the right spot at the right time. So not only was it stuff like, okay, you have to match the silhouette, or you have to kind of fit the target when it hits it, there were also moments where you kind of had to stomp your feet at the right time. It was really complicated. There was only one main version of this in arcades, as well as the 360 version. And it didn't really feature a lot of like licensed music at all. It mostly featured Konami in-house stuff. And this is Master Game gameplay, so Master Mode. So, all good things have to come to an end. Here were the last 2 main entries of 2DX on the PS2. You had 15 DJ Troopers, and then in 2009, you had 2DX 16 Empress, which it was one of the last Konami PS2 games. End of an era in a lot of ways. Notable for featuring what's called the Premium Best Disc. So it was more or less like a best of, and like a final thank you to the fans for supporting them for like literally 14 different games released across the years. Funny enough, this was also the era where Activision tried to make their own DJ game. So DJ Hero came out in 2009. It was their answer to like the DJ game question. But unlike Beatmania, which by that point was more or less focusing on like mainly electronic music, this is a big focus on mashups, a lot of mainstream pop kind of mashups. And the second game that was released a little after my timeline had a little more focus on electronic music, but it didn't really have a lot of room to evolve, and the series didn't really last that long. And Konami did release a number of games on the Wii. You had the 3 main hottest party games, as well as one based on the Italian cartoon Winx Club, which was kind of ghoulish in its own way. And there were rumors that there were going to be a 4th Universe game for the Xbox 360, but Universe 3 didn't sell as well as they hoped, so that game got canceled, and Konami recycled the original songs into this game.
Hey, I'm Liz, and I'm a personal trainer.
Hi, Liz.
It's time to walk it out and get fit to over 100 of your favorite songs. You can get in shape using your Wii Remote and nunchuck.
So instead of dancing, you're literally just walking in place. either on a DDR mat or like you're kind of waggling along, or you could like use a it's just a walking game. Something you could go outside and do for free. You're paying $50 for the privilege. Not only that, but the game is so horribly grindy, you have to unlock all of the 100 of your favorite songs very laboriously.
Maybe it was a mistake.
You will be.
Big waste of time in a lot of ways.
Alright, no more.
So, Konami was still releasing DDR in arcades. They released DDR X and then X2 around the tail end of this timeline. X, in a lot of ways, was their way of like, it was kind of like their 10th anniversary game, like 10th or 12th at that point, anniversary game. So it would feature a lot of old Dance Mania songs as well as like remixes and stuff like that. And then DDR X2 for a long while was like the last main game released in America as like a cabinet. And the last kind of true DDR game released with a soft pad was Dance Dance Revolution 2 for the Wii. I didn't have a slide for this, but there was also a game called Dance Dance Revolution for the PS3 and 360, but that game has a lot of issues in a lot of ways. And as a final note, remember these guys? Masaya Matsuura and Rodney Greenblatt? What were they doing in 2009? Well, the company Majesco, based out of New Jersey, came to them with a game idea they already came up with, and they were like, you guys should make this for us. So, they made this game for the Nintendo Wii.
Oh god.
I didn't know this was the same guys.
Feel the beat. Find the rhythm.
Hope you guys like marching band music.
And master the march.
Instead of walking in place, you're raising your arm up and down 200 times in a row.
Part of the musical experience. Lead the parade and recruit bandmates. Command the action in drill mode.
Ready? Okay. Figure eight. Ready, go!
Way to
Team
go.
up with a friend and rock
They
your
look like
lives.
they're being forced to be there instantly.
That's acting for you.
Major March
Samba.
Majestic March. Spring 2009.
As you can imagine, this game didn't really sell well. It didn't inspire a multi-million-dollar franchise at all. So that's the end of my timeline. What now? So where can I... Oh, I should also note that in 2018, way after my timeline ends, a lot of those original patents that were lasted for 20 years expired. So in theory, that probably inspired a lot of games I have no time to talk about. So where do I play this kind of stuff nowadays? Well, thankfully, the massive arcade conglomerate Round One has decided to open up, like at this point, almost like 150 like locations in the U.S. A lot of which are in California, but the closest ones to here in Hartford, Connecticut, would be the one over in Danbury, Connecticut, which I believe is like less than an hour away. And then if you're in Massachusetts, there's one over in Holyoke, Mass, and then there's one further north up in Portland, Mass, and then, like I said, most of them are in California, and they're adding like 5 more every year. But their goal is to have one in every U.S. state by some determined amount of time. So just look up where your closest one is. You can play the latest DDR version there. You can play the latest Pump It Up, as well as a lot of other games I have no time to talk about. So technically, there is a home version of DDR you can play now. There is Dance Dance Revolution Grand Prix, but of course, you can only play this if you have a Japanese Konami account and you pay them a subscription fee, as well as paying for DLC. You can do the same with Beatmania Infinitas, as well as Poppin' Lively, and then a bunch of other ones I have no time to mention. Very recently, there was a version of Pump It Up released for the Steam called Pump It Up Rise, but it's not really a game you would play with a dance mat. It's a game that's more or less for like playing on your keyboard or with a controller or with like a Steam Deck. So a lot of fans have a lot of contention about this one, so it's quite controversial. DJ Maxx is thriving. DJ Maxx Respect V has been going for like 7-8 years now, and it's more or less kind of a revival of the original DJ Maxx kind of like service game idea, and there's like hundreds of songs to pick from across the Portable series, as well as a lot of original songs that have come out since. If you're into DDR, there's a number of simulators you can play. Of course, you have Stepmania. You can just go and download Stepmania 5, but there's also more hardcore versions of it. There's OpenITG, which is more or less made for like what's called the post-ITG community. ITG Mania, Not in the Groove, which is more focused on like gimmick charts. And then you had Project Outfox, which is kind of like the next generation after Stepmania 5. And if you're into DDR, there's also the modern DDR community. There's a big DDR and ITG players Facebook group where you can go and post your scores, find out where to buy good pads, and just sort of network with other players and like go to meetups, find out about tournaments. It's a really fun and supportive community in a lot of ways, and I definitely recommend it. And there's also a lot of different Discord groups corresponding to certain arcades, certain regions of the country, and like different levels of skill. And if you're into Beatmania, there is a big community of what's called the Beatmania simulators, or BMS. And that could be a whole panel in and of itself, the whole scene. In a lot of ways, it's like the minor leagues of Beatmania. A lot of composers who started in the simulators would go and make official songs for Konami games later on. So this is a screenshot of the simulator known as Beta Raja, but there's also the old school one called Lunatic Rave 2. If you have any questions about that, let me know. And of course, you have Osu, which is a simulator of the Oendon games that has more or less taken on its own identity and its own community in and of itself. But less said about that, the better. And that's pretty much the end of my panel. Thank you very much for coming. You can go and check out my link tree over here at link.tr.ee/DefBeck. You can see my little mascot character there, Tito, who was drawn by my friend David Davis, or HP Comic out in California. I want to give special thanks to the website known as RemiWiki, which is one of the main sources of information all about the DDR games and the whole B-Money series. There's also the Japanese version of that called the Nemu Wiki. And there's also a panel, if you like this panel, there was a panel done in 2016 at MagFest called More Than I Needed to Know About Rhythm Games that feature a lot of little tidbits like that I went and adapted into this. So this is literally like the first panel I've ever done. I'm glad that I had this audience, and thank you very much for coming. And I don't know if I have any time for questions, so let me know. Or you can always approach me afterwards too. So hope you all have a lovely evening, and thank you very much.